What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. We are talking about every single MCU project in the lead up to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. It's coming out in just a couple of weeks. We're getting really excited here, so we're going to be talking about one of the biggest MCU films to date in our rewatch. We're talking about Avengers: Infinity War. So, welcome back to the rewatch. Max, I know you love this one. Let's just dive right in. What do you got?
Um, yeah, I mean, I really do love this film. It changes the tone of the MCU. Um, I would argue, at least until where we are right now in Phase 4, for good, because there are a lot of elements that I think are drawn out of Infinity War that started in Infinity War. And what I mean by that is the vulnerability of heroes, especially superheroes, and the people that we've come to root for at that point for the past like 10 years. So I think that's really poignant, and I think it's really important that we note that, because heroes generally aren't portrayed as fallible or as um, they're almost shown as invincible sometimes in a lot of superhero films. And I think what is so brilliant about Infinity War is that this isn't actually that much of a departure from the base and the foundation of the MCU, right? We started with Iron Man, who is a B-list character at that point, with probably a C-list actor in Robert Downey Jr. at that point. And then you have Thor, you have Captain America, who is probably the most well-known of the first of the
The
original
original
six.
six.
Yeah. And then you move into stories like the Avengers, where they're literally fighting each other before they can get their shit together and go and fight Loki. And fast forward all the way to Infinity War, that is still there. They're still fighting with each other. This is after Civil War. Steve Rogers and Iron Man haven't made up yet. Tony can't even bring himself to call Cap to New York and
It's a
say,
flip phone.
that's true. But, Steve is from the 1940s. He's still catching up. But you see my point, right? Is that there is a lot to unpack there when it comes to the imperfect nature of the heroes that we're following in this film.
Yeah. Um, I think there's something to be said for a story where the heroes lose, because that is the bottom line for the end of this film, is that everyone, as you say, we've come to root for the last 10 years, they lose. Half of them, more than half of them technically, are snapped away, become dust by Thanos snapping the Infinity Gauntlet. Um, you've got Tony Stark, who's been stabbed, abandoned on Titan with Nebula. You've got Gamora killed on Vormir to get the Soul Stone for Thanos. Peter Quill, before he gets snapped, says, "Did we just lose?" And yeah, man, you just lost. And I think one of the best descriptions that I think that I can have for this film is that while you have heroes fighting the good fight in Avengers Infinity War, they are not the protagonists of the film. And other people have said this before, probably in more eloquent ways, but Thanos is your protagonist. He's the one with the clear goal, the clear motivation. He has the most screen time, and he's the one for whom everyone else is trying to get in the way. And I think Josh Brolin delivers an outstanding performance. You know, I don't know how everyone kept straight faces with him in the mocap with the giant Thanos model head, a foot and a half over his head, but it's just the way that Thanos is portrayed in this film. He thinks and is convinced that he is in the right, that his motivations are pure in a twisted way. And I think that that's something that's really fresh. You know, it's, you say we followed some of these ideas before, but having the villain be the main character of the film essentially is almost like, you know, it's something we haven't seen before. You know, we talked about the motivations of Killmonger in yesterday's episode, talking about Black Panther. Thanos is another guy who is, again, like all villains, is sure he's right, but you know, there are other ways to manage population and resources. Double resources, for example, don't have the population. Yeah, this film, I think it gets a lot of its strength from Thanos and his clear goal. It also gets a lot of strength in its humor. You know, you talk about the weight of the film. The Avengers lose. Gamora gets killed. Loki gets killed. Heimdall gets killed.
And those first two, by the way, for our viewers, reminder, that happens within the first 10 minutes of the
That's
film.
the first scene of the film. We were watching
Yeah.
this with our buddy Chip, who you guys know from Shout at the Plate, and he was incredulous that was the first scene of the movie. So
I think a direct quote was, "This is the best opening scene I've ever seen in my entire life."
I think when we were done with the film, was the line was, "That was the best movie I've ever seen." Which, you know, I'm sure it felt that way the first time he saw it. And, you know, for a lot of people, that is how they feel. What's great about this film, and I do want to get back to my point about the humor, is that you're getting interactions between characters. And the MCU has become so entangled within itself by this point. You know, you've got the Avengers, you've got Captain America Civil War, but now you're mixing in the Guardians, you're mixing in, you know, real stories with the Black Panther characters and the Spider-Man characters, the Guardians interacting with the Avengers, Doctor Strange is coming in, Wong's coming in for a little bit. All these guys, all these girls, all these everybody coming together in one movie. It's just insane to see them all together, right?
Yeah. That's the only word that you can describe it. I mean, it's a massive film. And, you know, one of my favorite little factoids tying both Infinity War and Black Panther together is that they were on some farm in Georgia. They didn't, for the Battle of Wakanda, and they literally terraformed the entire acreage into Wakanda. They created a river that runs through sort of the middle of the battlefield. They planted all the trees, and like, I just think that that's so cool, right? The commitment to everything. And they filmed Black Panther and Infinity War so close together that some of the warrior chants that the Wakandans cry out during battle, the Russo brothers didn't know about them at that point. So they just started doing them. All of the Wakandans in the army, and Chadwick Boseman, and
Winston Duke.
Winston Duke, yep. Just kind of electrified the set, I think, and provided a great behind the scenes moment for us to hear about afterwards. But you're totally right. With the weight of this film, you gotta cut it with some humor, and I think they did that well.
So you want to get into rankings and ratings?
Yeah. This is pretty easy for me. It's it's not a perfect film, but for the sake of my rankings and ratings, this is going to be 100, and it will be my number 1 film out of 32.
Wow!
So this is the big one, everyone.
This is the big one for Max.
Yep. And it's because of the departure from, you know, a lot of the earlier themes, while also continuing some of those through lines. And I think that it was done brilliantly. There are some slow moments, but it always felt like it was building to something, and it clearly did.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we finally got to your number 1. I'm sorry that the way that we've been rotating back and forth wasn't your turn to host, but you gave a lot of good commentary there. Yeah, I'm gonna say it's lower. Obviously, it's not also gonna be my number one with 100 score. This is top 10 for me. It rises and falls. I think it's climbed in my last two rewatch viewings into my top 10. Um, I would say after seeing it today, it would be 8th in the MCU, firmly top 10 now, and I don't think that'll change. I just think that pacing is kind of an issue in this film. You go drags of 30, 40 minutes where you're not checking in with certain characters. And that's, I think, the film's critical flaw is that, when you're trying to balance all of these characters, Civil War checks in on everyone much more often. Endgame checks in on everyone much more often. Granted, it's a much more manageable cast in each, and you're trying to cover a lot of ground in Avengers Infinity War. But again, in 2.5 hours, when you're going 30, 35, 40 minutes without checking in on Tony Stark or Steve Rogers, that's who you pay to see. So it's going to be right there, 8th in my MCU rankings. And I'm also going to toss it a 94 out of 100. So solid A range, but again, no higher. Maybe it'll rise. Its current trajectory will probably put it in the top 5 at some point. I don't know. But again, it's an Avengers film. It's fantastic. Love Infinity War. So that should just about do it here for this episode of the Rewatch. Again, we hope you enjoy this film as much as we do. We want to know what you think about Infinity War, the rest of the MCU. Get excited. Multiverse of Madness is just in a couple of weeks. So we'll see you tomorrow for Ant-Man and the Wasp, Max's other favorite film.
Yeah, you're right. It's number 2.
Yeah. It's a little sneak peek for tomorrow. All right. Good night.
See ya.